This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
The last thing you want to hear when you need your auto insurance most is a robot with countless irrelevant menu options. Which is why with USAA Auto Insurance, you'll get great service that is easy and reliable, all at the touch of a button. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
USAA. Hilton brings you new ways to stay, with experiences that let you capture the glory days. Introducing the Graduate Hotels. Each inspired by local college towns, these stays are always original and never boring. Get in touch with traditions all across the country and enjoy a stay that's a class above the rest. Book at Graduate Hotels with Hilton Honors Points at Hilton.com. It's a win-win. Hilton, for the stay.
This is the Youth Sports Insider, your backstage pass into the business of youth sports. We sit down with the forward thinkers and innovators changing how the game is played off the field. Youth Sports Insider, where passion meets opportunity.
Welcome to another episode of Youth Sports Insider. I'm your host, Bill Flitter. Today we are joined by Carrie Gamper from Base Sports Group. Welcome to the show, Carrie.
Thanks so much, Bill. Excited to be here.
Awesome. And in our pre-interview, you were telling me you're a former lacrosse player, right?
Yep.
And I loved your story. So maybe you can share that with us. And then maybe your what about 14, 15 years in youth sports sponsorship?
Yeah, definitely. I want to dig into certainly how I got started in sponsorship, and then how that journey brought me into the youth sports space.
Awesome. Yeah. All right, take it away.
Awesome.
Mike is yours.
Yeah, thank you. So starting with lacrosse and the foundation, really like many of us, the reason I'm in sports today is because I was an athlete at a very young age. My sport, as you mentioned, was lacrosse. I was a individual who did not come to sports as naturally as others, but I loved lacrosse so much. I was one of those that worked incredibly hard in order to achieve the opportunities that I was able to in the long run. And that included, my junior year of high school, where I went to a relatively competitive preparatory school where lacrosse was an important sport. I was the only junior in my class junior year who got cut from the lacrosse team, who tried out, and advised by an individual who ended up in the U.S. Lacrosse Hall of Fame that lacrosse might not be my sport. Like many other youth athletes, and my story is certainly not unique, I was bolstered by some incredible coaches and individuals around me that gave me the opportunity and confidence to continue playing outside of school and with other resources. And then that they advocated to one coach in particular at the D1 level to give me a shot. And that was at the University of Denver, where I was granted the opportunity to come and walk on with no guarantee of ever playing, which was all I needed. So I went out to Denver from Baltimore and worked very hard and was able to captain the D1 women's lacrosse team by my senior year, which there's a lot of other people that made that possible, but I attribute a lot of it to, what many people who were elite athletes say is that it's a lot of hard work when no one's watching. But I think, it also laid the foundation for why I'm so passionate about youth sports, is because it did grant me opportunities that I wouldn't have been given otherwise, and support systems around me. So I went on after college to go into the lacrosse industry. I made sure to coach and volunteer in the lacrosse world pretty much every year since I graduated college. But when I started working professionally in lacrosse for a lacrosse manufacturing company, I learned very quickly that where money flows is very important to the sports industry, and how can I be engaged with that? And then more importantly, what I fell in love with was the measurement of that, the measurement of marketing, the measurement of investments that brands and that that operators were seeing in the sponsorship world. So I went to work for a company called Nielsen. Nielsen's the TV ratings company that measures a great deal of things in the sports and entertainment world, one of which being sponsorship. And I was grateful enough to get to work in the sponsorship world with the likes of FIFA, with the NBA, with the NFL, with Ironman, on the brand side with companies like Ticketmaster and Pringles and Globe Life, with Disney and Eli Lilly. So you really ran the gamut in all types of properties and all types of sponsors. And I fell in love with, the data side of that and being able to measure the value and impact of sponsorship. So fast forward a little bit, when I was working in college sponsorship, and measuring and valuing and driving value in the collegiate sports sponsorship world, I got connected with and my co-founder now, Mark Dvorsnak, and his background in youth sports for over a decade when we got connected, was really interesting to me, and seeing the growth and the professionalism that was starting to come to this youth sports space, which I know we're going to dig into a little bit
Yeah.
today. But the ability to start layering in sponsorship, almost like Learfield and IMG did decades and decades ago, was really interesting. And if you could add a level of measurement to it, like brands are used to seeing in the college and professional sports world, and start giving them an apples to apples comparison on their investments, you can start seeing and driving proof of return at a higher rate, for this youth space than what they're currently garnering. And that's sort of the genesis of us developing this company called Base Sports Group. So I'm really excited to be, a leader of this company, of this industry, to be, building the largest youth sports sponsorship company in the country, and to be representing facilities and events in the youth sports space to sponsors in 40 plus states, and engaging consumers in all 50, which is really what we do. We help negotiate and manage sponsorships for facilities and events in youth sports all across the country.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that background.
Yeah.
One of the things basically what we're going to talk about today is the ROI of
Yeah.
youth sponsorships, and looking at hard metrics, soft metrics. But before we dive into that, I'm curious. There's a couple trends that I've been seeing in youth sports participation, and there was a number that's floating out there that 70% of kids are dropping out of organized sports by the age of 13. What's your perspective on that?
I mean, there's a lot of reasons that go into that. And I think if you look at the data, the number of girls being, female, ex-female athlete,
Hmm.
certainly that's my passion point. The rate of girls dropping out is significantly higher. And I think if I read the stats correctly, they really start the drop off around age 10, really after fifth grade. And then it slowly starts declining really through the high school ages. There's so many reasons that I think
Do
that can be given for that.
you see any
As I
trends
mentioned,
though across the youth sports landscape?
I think professionalism, like I mentioned, into
Mhm.
sports is a piece of it. I certainly
Yeah.
think the cost of travel sports has made it more difficult for low income and middle income families to be able to justify and afford being able to go to a lot of these, at that higher level. And
Yeah.
I certainly understand that. As I said, I was a coach for a number of years. This is actually my first year not coaching since graduating college. But one of the biggest things you see in coaching is the massive decline of referees and umpires.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Huge. Huge.
Huge. And I
Yeah.
mean, I don't want to be one. I greatly admire my friends and sister who are one, but it's not, it's a tough opportunity. You don't get paid a whole lot. You get yelled at a whole lot. And that's, I think, a huge decline. I know, like, my sister coaches lacrosse in Montana, and she became a referee because her daughters just want to play, and there's almost no one that knows the sport of lacrosse, out in
Mhm.
Montana. So she had to become a ref in order for her kids to play. So that's a
Yeah. It's a
huge issue.
thankless job, is what it is.
Completely.
Yeah.
Equipment's getting more expensive. I mean, there's a whole host of reasons that, I think compound. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, it is difficult. And I think there are ways that we're going to talk about that I hope to see in the future offer more opportunities for youth athletes to get on the field. But, yeah, I think those are a good
Yeah.
number of reasons.
Yeah, I have a friend who's a basketball referee, high school, and when I see him on, I always ask him, so whose dreams did you ruin this week? Right? I mean, we just
No.
kind of have we have a laugh about it just because that is how some people are looking at rest. Like, not a foul, you took away this, yeah, right. And it's just, yeah. So anyway, thankless job.
Yeah.
Over my 20 years of coaching, the one thing that I learned is, they're part of the game. They're part of the human game,
Right.
and they're you just have to roll with it. The only time I get mad or angry is when there's a safety issue that they're just, it gets repeated throughout the games. Players are being a little bit rough, and I see my
Yeah.
players, getting hurt or whatever. It's the only time, but just letting them
Uh,
do their job.
I agree. And the big thing that I always try to remind my athletes when I coach is that just like they're new to the sport, even if they've been in it 4 years, a referee has to start somewhere. And today they're starting with you, and you remember what it was like on your first day or your first
That's
year, your
right.
first 3 years. This is a sport. They are getting better every day, and we're going to cheer them on just like we're cheering our team on. And it's the only way that we can encourage them to stay with it and keep getting better. Because if we keep getting new refs every year, we're just going to keep cycling through the same exhausting
Yeah.
conversation year after year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be the first to admit I'm the worst ref. I
I,
get
me
caught up in the
too.
game, and I'm like, move your feet. You're not boxing out, right? And I'm like, oh,
Right.
right. Wait a second. I got the whistle.
Wrong team. Right. Yeah.
Uh,
I hear that.
so looking at the landscape, like if you look at the events, let's maybe start there.
Yeah.
Where are where are they struggling to get participation? And let's look at events and teams. Like, are there particular, maybe a better way to ask this is sports on the decline, and then sports on the opposite, true, sports on the increase that you're seeing?
So the interesting thing is there's not a lot of data that tracks this on the um, club side. The best data that
Hmm.
I've seen that tracks sports participation is the NFHS,
Hmm.
which does a pretty good job, I think, of tracking the high school participation. But like we said, there's a lot of drop off pre high school. So it doesn't really, I think, reflect what the larger sports market is. I know, there's Aspen Institute and others that are really trying to, wrap their
Right.
hands around
Yeah.
this, but there's just really no good way to track it. We are doing a lot of research into this space. Participation numbers isn't one that we're really tracking right now.
Yeah.
It's sort of, like I said, it's just sort of tough to wrap your arms around. From a engagement perspective, um, growth from what I've been hearing, like a lot of the individual sports are seeing a rise again. So track is seeing a huge increase. Not individual sport, but swimming seeing an increase. Basketball, smaller sports are seeing increase. Potentially fewer resources needed to play might be a factor of
Mm.
that.
Hmm.
I also think Alex Ohanian, I'm probably butchering his name, as I'll say, husband of Serena Williams, but also founder of Reddit. And individuals like him, there's others out there. Serena's another one, but Billie Jean King's another one.
Hmm.
Allison Felix is another one, who are starting to really put their money where their mouth is to find ways to invest at the pro level of certain sports and at somewhat at the collegiate level. And I think the spotlight and opportunity that they're creating at that pro level might be driving some level of awareness and engagement at lower tiers. I know that's certainly their intent. Like Alex Ohanian, I know for the track championships on the women's side, he increased the purse something like 3 times what it had been in
Wow.
previous years, making it a livable wage for female athletes to be track stars. And so that should help inspire future generations. That's the intent. I think that's certainly commendable. My feedback to that would be I appreciate and think it's great to see investment at pro levels, but it's not going to create an immediate impact to the masses because of all the things we're talking about. It's not easy to stay with it. And I think investment needs to come across the entire industry. And that's something, we're working on. But it is great to see that more investment is going to women's sports and more investments going at the pro level across the board. But our focus is trying to create
Yeah.
access at all spots.
And I think we'll see that change over the next few years with the amount of money that's now and the focus on youth sports.
Yeah.
It's scaling, again, depending where you get your numbers from, at least a $20 billion industry. What do you think is driving that, though? Right? Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we're seeing it. We're actually, the data we're looking at is that it's already a $30 billion industry, and it
Hmm.
is projected to be as much as a $70 billion industry by, somewhere in the 2030s. The main reason that is because one, the cost of sports is going up. So with that, like we mentioned, all the reasons we talked about, cost of sports has continued to increase. While participation has declined, I don't think at any point there'll be a drop off of youth sports. Parents will always find the value and should always find the value in having their children sign up for youth sports for the lifelong lessons that you get, we all know that you get out of being a part of a team or a part of a sport. So you'll continue to see investment. And then at the highest tier, all the athletes that are playing at the club level in the AAUs, the recruiting, the skills competitions, all of the highest level of high school recruiting is just, the investment is getting astronomically higher. So the amount of personal training, the amount of
Yeah.
lifting gyms, all
Hmm.
of that is already more than two times what it's almost like 10x what it would have been when I played. I never lifted a day in my life before I went to college. And now I don't know one lacrosse player who's going into college who doesn't lift.
Yep.
So they have to be a member of gym. They've got to get trainers that teach them how to lift, and all those costs compound. So I think that is driving a significant portion of it as well.
I was talking to a youth athlete. She's a basketball player. She plays on one of the very high level travel basketball teams.
Yep.
And she was telling me about her summer routine. So they do most of their games on the weekends because they're pulling kids from everywhere. So they have a
Yep.
practice and then right. Um, but part of that training during the week was weightlifting, which I think is awesome for
Yeah.
young, as long as it's supervised, right? And they're
Absolutely.
doing it the right way. And she's got a trainer, and then she has, um, her basketball trainer, right, during the week, and then the
Yeah.
practice. And it's just, yeah. So, yeah, I can see that those dollars add up. And most families, I laugh at this number. I'm from California, right? And
Okay.
the average is about $900 per sport per kid that a family is spending, right? 800 and
Yeah.
some, right? And I laugh at that. I'm like, oh, that's
No.
that's the California prices for sure.
I don't
So
even think that's reflective of national prices probably anymore. I mean, from what we're
yeah,
seeing, maybe at like a really young elementary school level, but you just
maybe,
put
yeah,
equipment in, like there's no, I mean,
right,
hockey and lacrosse, there's no way that's
right.
all they're
My
spending.
son was a baseball catcher, so.
Exact same thing.
Yeah, gloves, gear, and he was growing, so the gear would last him a short period of time. And then
Yep.
we were laughing like one year to the next where his breastplate, went from, the full body and then just above his belly button. And I'm like, dude, you gotta get a new, right? So, but then you're right, you're investing in that.
Every couple
Yeah.
years, absolutely.
Yeah. So, there's been conversation about the professionalization of youth sports
Yeah.
and, you know, making it, some are arguing that, it's making sports, and we alluded to it, less accessible to lower
Yep.
income families. Let's dive into then this concept of how does sports sponsorship help with subsidizing. You know what? In this question, sorry, we'll come back to that question. I think it's really important to first, what is youth sports? Like, what is the makeup of that? Do you have an opinion?
I totally do because we get asked this all the time.
Yeah.
We really look at youth sports in really like three factors. You've
Hmm.
got your rec or your like sub 6 year old sports, really sub
Yeah.
like 8 to 9 years. That's your rec sports typically, local community, YMCA, Boys and Girls Club. Like a lot of some of our facilities will have like little dribblers, little kickers, all of those
Right.
types of
Yeah.
programs where it's insular. That's really like one form of youth sports. Your next tier that I think is the measure that NFHS is that scholastic. So some middle schools have sports, some high school, many high schools have sports. So you've got the scholastic vertical of sports.
Mm-hmm.
We don't touch scholastic. There's a lot of red tape, just like
Yeah.
there isn't sponsored entering college. We don't touch scholastic. There's certainly value there. Think about high school in Texas football. Like, I mean, do you
Right.
get
Right.
anything more
Exactly. Yeah.
value
Yeah.
than that?
Yeah.
And then, there's that middle ground that sort of ballooned in like the 2012s on, mid 2000s, and that's the club sports. And that the
Mm-hmm.
genesis of that ecosystem came through the desire to play sports in college and the recruiting pathway that developed. And that's where we focus. Is we focus in that club and that summer ball that plays spring and fall, but that really middle ground of and that's the largest and fastest growing ecosystem of sports.
And that ranges in age too, right?
Completely. We've
Yeah.
got one of our largest events. We've got a 700 team middle school baseball event. So those are all, what's middle school, 11 to 13.
Yeah.
So those are all, relatively little kids. We don't have much in the elementary school, a little bit, but largely we do middle school and high school.
Mm-hmm. And let's
Yeah.
now go back to this other question of
Yeah.
how does sports sponsorship help offset costs? And just approach it from a high level aspect. It sounds very obvious, but
Yeah. Before I touch on that, I want to sort of
yeah,
also talk about why the genesis of club sports, obviously the recruiting space, but also like why is
right.
it happening so young? I think is a question we get a lot and the parents ask a lot. But when I played middle school sports, lacrosse,
Yeah.
soccer, whatever it was largely larger community based across the state of Maryland where I was, but all of our coaches were volunteer parents. And this is pre the internet age, by and large, or early
Hmm.
internet age. So our parents came home from work and had nothing to do. That's not totally fair, but by and large, their post work activities were community engagement, or they had the time or the desire to volunteer. The volunteering in sports, as we kind of alluded to, taking on extra roles like refs aren't volunteers, but still are dwindling and it doesn't really exist anymore. Often parents look at coaches as someone who is paid, they are a hired hand and it is their job to make these athletes better rather than as a parent volunteering to give the kids a chance to play. So with that comes more professionalism, and then obviously that's a part of why this club sports and the costs of everything drive up, is because there just isn't the same culture that there was 25, 30 years ago. And that's
Do you think
okay.
the club sports will affect the scholastic sports, maybe at the high school level?
Oh, they absolutely have. I
Hmm.
mean, many athletes have become individual athletes by high school in order to get really good at their sport. So that means they're not playing on 3 or 4 high school teams. So some of your hypothetically best athletes aren't benefiting multiple sports like they used to years ago. You used to have the best athlete on the football team was often the
Yeah,
best athlete on the baseball team. But now they're individual athletes. So you're not seeing that cross pollination, which I have a lot of opinions about. I do think that you should be cross pollinating. I
I do
still think it's good for
too.
the
Yeah.
athlete, but it's just not the case as
Well,
much
all
anymore.
studies show that it's the best thing for the athlete's body and mind.
Absolutely. I mean,
Just growth, right?
I,
So,
I love the I don't I love the Kelsey brothers for lots of reasons, but one of the things are very vocal about is that they were two sport athletes. They were football and lacrosse in college, in high school,
yeah.
and the benefit that lacrosse gave to them as football athletes, and I think that's really cool. So I think there should be more of that, and the ability to train your body in different ways. But yeah,
Well, I've
that isn't
seen
always the case.
in the Bay Area, and I know it's other pockets too, but these young high school players playing for their club teams, professional club teams, right? Whatever they call them, right? Then they're missing out on the high school experience. They sign a contract, they get some funding, and then are not allowed to play for their high school. Now, in my opinion, they're going to I think they're going to look back and say, right, I miss playing with my buddies, or I
I
miss the high
think
school
so, but
experience.
That's a European model that's been happening for the European soccer
No.
model has been happening for, I mean, David Beckham got signed at 9 or something like that. So,
Yeah, but they don't have, from my understanding, the high school sports isn't as big or
right.
part
It's
of
a
the school.
different
So,
model.
right.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's more, in my opinion, that's happening because we're more of a global economy and the European model
Yeah.
has become introduced and has started affecting our model in the way we've typically done sports. But yeah, you're right. It's not the same apples to apples, but I do
Right.
think
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons why that's probably happened. But to go back to your question about
Yeah.
sponsorship,
And we
um,
knew this was going to happen, Carrie,
yeah,
right? We were trying to control ourselves. We get so excited about this stuff. And one of the
right.
things we said that we could probably talk about this stuff for 2 hours or more. So, all right, focus up. Here we go.
Focus
Sponsorship.
on.
Yeah.
Yes. But yeah, so all of these reasons that costs have
Right.
increased and that parents are athletes are specializing and parents are investing. Yeah, I mean, the reason sponsorship is so important is because for the top 1% and many of the middle class, the investment of what it costs to be a part of this ecosystem, the value is there and they understand it and they're willing to do it. But for a lot of low income families where they might have incredible athletes, where they might have, someone who really deserves the opportunity, realistically, college coaches only have so many opportunities to see athletes. If they can't get to the right recruiting events, they can't be a part of that system, and if they can't afford to fly to Kansas City,
That's
where
right. Yeah.
so like we have an event this weekend that's in Kansas City, Missouri. It's 700 volleyball teams that are coming together from 50 states. Every
Wow.
single D1, D2, and D3 college coach in the country that is a women's volleyball coach is at this Kansas City event. It's called the NIT. We have a ton of sponsors that are there, but the the reason that coaches only go to so many is they only have so much time. So if
Right.
you're not at an event where a college coach is, your best shot of getting recruited is to send a video in which case you're competing against thousands of videos. So if you want to get seen, you've got to get to these events. If you can't afford flight, if you can't afford car rental, if you can't afford hotels, I mean, not to mention even the investment to pay to be a part of the event, the entry fee, parking, all of the compounded lunches, dinners, breakfasts, all the compounded expenses to get to these recruiting events, it becomes very difficult to get recruited. And then it becomes very difficult to see the point of staying in these youth sports opportunities.
One of the
So,
reasons I started down this journey too is because I coached basketball at a private boys' high school,
yep,
and I saw the kids who didn't have the trainer, didn't have the AAU team. They were just getting cut, and I saw their faces, and I was just like, man, they just don't have the opportunity. So I created, my first club team got funding to help cover their costs, right? To participate.
it's amazing.
So it was, and that just kind of got me down this journey of returning youth sports back to the kids and keep,
Totally.
as much as it's going 100 miles an hour on this idea of, of professionalization, I'm holding on to the coat string, trying to pull it back, right, to a little bit, right, to these
Yeah.
conversations and the various podcasts that we do. And I just think it's really important that we don't lose why we're doing this, right? I
I
did a
agree.
survey with a bunch. Sorry, I was going to add one more thing there. I
Yeah,
did a survey with a
please.
bunch of my parents and my club team, and you know, the survey. I was doing it real time. So I was really curious what they were. In the first couple that were coming in, I had them rank a few things: winning, fun. I forget some of the other things on that list, but the first ones that started to come back in, that winning was more important than fun. And this is great. This is eighth grade and below, and I'm like, still got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
It evened out where fun came to the top. But you know what the number one answer was? Now I remember the number one answer was, I coach girls, so this is a girls program, was confidence. I want my daughter to
Okay.
have confidence. At the end of it, that's what I'm like, perfect, because that's what I always say.
That's awesome.
We coach confidence in
Yep.
basket. We just happen to do it through basketball.
Well, there's
Uh,
a stat, I believe it's 70% of all, this number's small, but all Fortune
yeah.
500 or all Fortune
Oh yeah.
1000 executives who are women,
Yeah.
70% of those women played sports at a
Mm.
collegiate or a high school level.
Yeah. No
Um,
surprise.
right, because of it's all that. It's the confidence that sports gives you, I think, is the
Hmm.
main reason. And competitive edge and teamwork and all of the other
That's right.
wonderful
Yeah. Yeah.
reasons that we all know that youth sports are important. But yeah, I think you did mention something that is interesting. You mentioned, getting investment for the team to drive value and drive opportunity. And I think
Mm.
there's sort of two conversations that can be had there in youth sports. There's the 501(c)(3), and then
That's
there's
right.
the business model,
Hmm. Hmm.
and it's understanding the value of both of them. So if most youth sports in this day and age are not nonprofits, most are for-profit
Yeah.
organizations. If it is a nonprofit, there is definitely value from the community, from charitable giving that I think certainly can be built around those. And I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of opportunity there, and there's no real need to deliver value back. And that's wonderful. The groups we work with are not 501(c)(3)s, so a brand investment isn't a giving. They want to see
Yeah.
value in their investments. So it's this give and take of, okay, we want to bring brands in because we want to create more access to youth sports. So what's the ecosystem that has to be created in order to do that? Because it's not a nonprofit. This is not a charity. These are for-profit entities working together to create a value ecosystem for families. And that's sort of that's the balancing act that we're very cognizant that we live within. And we're not a nonprofit either. We're a for-profit.
Right.
So it's all of these for-profits that are trying to do good for families and for kids that are in this ecosystem. And we're very conscious of that, and we're really working on that.
Well, you can see some people making the argument that by getting sports sponsorship, you're just gonna put the operators are just gonna put that in their pocket, right? It's just gonna make them fat.
Sure. And I think there's certainly an argument to be made there, but I think there's value that comes with sponsorship, or certainly the way we're building sponsorship.
Hmm.
So, for example, I mentioned that volleyball tournament that we have coming up. There's a couple of sponsors that we're bringing in that, on top of adding value, paid value to be a part of the event, which we're hoping and striving to start driving costs down through those sponsorships.
Hmm.
What they're doing is they're also bringing on-site value to the engaged experience of parents and kids. So, we've got incredible brand called Honey Stinger. They're bringing
Hmm.
free snacks to all the athletes who come. So it's one of those, it's a small touch point, but value driving. So sponsors don't just show up and look to get signups, look to get information, buy your information, and look to move forward, which had happened in the future in this ecosystem. Our focus is that every brand that comes into this ecosystem is bringing value for the consumer in that initial
Yeah.
partnership. And that's values in a lot of different ways: discounted offerings, free product, certain other elements. So there's an immediate impact to the consumer, in addition to we're looking at value driving opportunities to help lower some of those costs. We're also we've got a couple of partners and that we're working through some deals on that have need-based opportunities that can be applied for, based and integrated into their partnerships. So they're creating budgets and opportunities for low-income teams or
Mm-hmm.
individuals to be able to apply for, you know, XYZ brand scholarship.
Yeah.
It's not a charity, but it is a brand helping cover costs for athletes and teams. So we are
Nice.
working on that also.
So, going back to what you said though, of brands, you're helping working with the operators to drive down the cost. Can you give an
Yeah.
example of that?
Yeah.
Again, you don't
So,
necessarily, if you're not comfortable giving names, that's not necessarily what I'm asking for. Just like,
yeah.
what's the process you're doing?
Absolutely. So, it's not done. We're working on it right now. I'm actually going to call
Hmm.
tomorrow on this, but we've got a ticketing company. A lot of these events, not every sport in youth sports is slightly different in how they operate, but
Hmm. Hmm.
many baseball events, many large scale baseball events have the athlete entry fee, or the team entry fee includes the athlete's ticket into the event, but that does not include parents and siblings. So
Right.
parents and
Yeah.
siblings often have to pay for a ticket to enter into the event.
And that cost is
Um,
rising as well. 10,
that cost
15,
is often rising.
$25, right?
Yep, exactly.
Crazy. Yeah.
Um, and I can get largely into the economics, but it all evens out in the end among sports. But yes, that also is certainly a portion of the situation right now. But one of the things we're looking at with the ticketing companies is, can they come on and be a service provider, a sponsor, a service provider for the operator, but part of that lower or eliminate like the processing fees. And then it's a small dollar figure that can be taken out of every single one of the tickets that's purchased by families across the board. So it's an easy way to start, instead of rising costs, start immediately lowering some of those costs for families.
Well, what's their incentive to do that though?
Data.
Oh, yeah.
So for you asking, what's the incentive of the brand?
Well, I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood you.
Yep.
You mentioned that the ticketing company, right?
Yep.
So XYZ ticketing company,
Yep.
you're asking them to lower their processing fees.
It's a new so right now they don't have a ticketing company. They have a ticketing company, but it's not a sponsorship agreement. Right now they're paying. So if I'm I'm Purple Tournament Company. Purple Tournament Company is paying a ticketing platform to run and manage all of their tickets. There's no sponsorship right now.
Right.
So there's a different, red ticketing company that's interested in coming on and getting that entire business. So they are paid, they take on the entire industry of that purple company. And then that baseball organization, every tournament they run would run through this new company's ticketing platform. And as a part of that agreement, the processing fee, they'll take a smaller margin on all their processing fee. So it lowers the cost of a per ticket basis for parents.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And is there an outside sponsor, a drink company that's sponsoring that ticket,
That example would just be the ticket company. They wouldn't cover all of the cost of the tickets, but they would pay a sponsorship fee to the operator and give a sort of that value back to the parents, would be a lower cost to parents.
Yeah.
And then they'd get
for the price of doing business of getting the bigger tournament.
Exactly.
That makes total sense. Okay, I got you. And on that same vein, what types of companies, you mentioned a few, but who's investing in youth sports sponsorship? Are there particular industries? We know that, right? Everyone should 100%, right? We could talk, when we're going to get to that, like why, but first off, where are you seeing the like, oh, that's a no-brainer?
Right. So if you think about your two largest consumers in youth sports, the two profiles you have are mom, because mom's going to see Junior and Susie play, and then you've got Gen Z to be Gen A very soon here, as your two core consumer groups. And most notably, Gen Z and again to be Gen A are the most financially empowered teenagers of any time in history, because every single one of them has a cell phone and every single one of them has some sort of payment platform,
right?
And or Uber Eats, DoorDash, what have you. So they are already spending money independently of parents, so they can make informed decisions that can be affected directly at point of engagement, which is, you think about these youth sports events. I mean, you've been to them, you're on site for 6 to 8 hours per day, and you go to a tournament that's 2-3 days out on average. So you're spending 156 hours per year, assuming you're going to 8 or 9 of these events annually, which is the average number of these families are going to. I mean, there's no better place to get a captured audience for any brand that's targeting mom, who controls 80% of purse strings for the household, including things like cars and insurance that people don't think of, banking. Mom makes most of those decisions. So mom and financially empowered Gen Z consumers.
I'm just laughing because I'm thinking about my own situation in my household. I think it's a little bit higher than that percentage.
Yeah.
I get an allowance.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So walk us through. Well, let me start this. We've already established, and one of the reasons why we even started this podcast is talk about the business of youth sports. You and I are in the preaching to the choir. We think all brands should look into youth sports and should be sponsoring youth sports. Can't scroll past the ads. You got a captive audience. Blah blah blah. Okay. So you're walking into. Let's pick a brand. Let's pick a brand that might. Well, you talked about blinking the honey
Yeti,
honey
Honey Stinger, Honey
Honey
Stinger's.
Stinger. Let's talk about Honey
Yeah,
Stinger. So
yeah,
we're
we
just going to
love
use
them.
them as an example. Okay. You
Awesome.
walk into Honey Stinger, first time they're seeing you, first time they're talking about you sports.
Yeah, which it was
You
when they
have that
talked to
guy
me.
in the corner that says, "No way."
Yeah.
What are his concerns or her concerns?
The first concern we typically get is a misunderstanding of what youth sports is. And that goes back to everyone projects their personal experience
Yeah.
onto what we bring to the table. And so most people buying sponsorship or marketing opportunities, their experience with quote unquote youth sports is that rec sports experience.
Yeah,
So
that makes
they go
sense.
to the corner
Yep.
baseball field or the corner soccer field with volunteers or like little league baseball, and their pictures, we're coming to them with like one or two cute opportunities in small communities rather than recognizing that shift in the ecosystem, these mega events like that volleyball tournament I mentioned, or we've got a 1,200 team softball event. I mean, conceptually, 1,200 teams, 45,000 consumers over a 5-day period that you have as a captured audience. I
My
mean, it's
town I grew up in was 45,000 people.
I live in the middle of nowhere, but I live in a town of 270 people. So like, yeah, they would take over where I live. But yes, I mean, it's mind
It's
boggling,
mind-boggling. Yeah.
but you have to, if you aren't familiar with it, it seems so far-fetched to have that big of an event that the re-education and the education around where youth sports is basically the foundation we have to lay with every brand we walk into a room with.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. That's
And
yeah.
Bill, it's funny. It's not even just every brand. I've had conversations with executives at the NBA. I've had conversations with executives at MLS and the NWSL, people who are in this sports world
Mm,
every day, and they have no concept of
yeah.
what's happening in the larger youth sports world and how much it rivals in size what's happening in
Oh,
their worlds.
if they just look at the viewership of youth sports compared to the NFL or Major League Baseball, I ran the numbers on that. And again, I'm not data scientist, but even if you just look at the viewership and the number of youth sports you attend every year
Yep.
versus the amount of games you're watching, it's an astronomical difference. And here, you know, the NFL's getting the big sponsorships when mom and dad are not watching them because they're sitting on a Sunday at their kid's soccer game or basketball game or wherever it is. It's
Totally. I mean,
unbelievable.
you go to an average, I think we have the data on this. The parents go to an average of 2 to 3. If you're an NBA fan, so you're already an NBA fan, you're
Yeah,
going to an average of 2 to 3 NBA games per year of all NBA fans who are parents versus going to 9 tournaments just for travel sports, not even including scholastic or any other competition they're doing, just
right.
for travel
Yeah,
sports that these parents are doing. So, like, if you're thinking about where their mind share is, where their money's going, where their time is,
yeah,
where
it's
their mental
crazy.
capacity is, mom is at youth sports much more than and even dad is at pro sports.
And you mentioned that on the money side, they're like, why use sports? But I've ran into situations too when talking to um, event organizers or well, there's a couple people in Bay Area. They run a tournament every weekend except for major holidays. Every
Yep.
weekend.
Yep.
And I approached them just because I go to their tournaments and pay to play there, right? I said, I'm not seeing any sponsorships. And literally looks at me like, what are you talking about? And follow up with the question of, why would I do that? And at first I thought he was joking. Like, why
Yeah.
would, what? Like, okay, so you just increased the gate fee $5 from 3 months ago. That's why you should do that. Like,
I,
get people into your gym, sell them the snacks at the back of the gym, right? Increase the number of people that are coming through, and I don't have to again
I know,
preaching to
but
the
see,
choir.
you and I talked about this, and I want to address that because you're right. Conceptually, as the parent, it's like, no kidding, just go throw a billboard up. But the process for an operator to sell sponsorship
Oh,
means
too
they have
slow.
to divert
That's
attention
right.
from
That's
whatever
right.
else they're
Yeah.
doing, pick up the phone, call, negotiate, write contracts, manage contracts, order assets, get them hung, hope they're happy, send examples, and then in 8 months do it all
Do
over
it all
again with
over
that brand
again.
to get
Yeah.
that dollar figure back. And
Yeah.
they're working at such a low margin already, which seems crazy, but they usually are. They can't want to do it, and they just can't operate and do it themselves. And so for them, from a time perspective, they'd rather see 15 less people at increased cost than try to figure out
It's
how to
easier.
do this. Right.
Two
Or they
strokes,
also
I can
just
just raise the price, right?
that, and they just
Yeah.
don't know how. Sponsorship
Yeah.
is not often as easy as just every brand has a different, and this can be part of sort of where we're going, but
Yeah.
why a brand invests in sponsorship is very different. I think we sort of touched on this, but it's very different. And they want to see, Gimmer, it's not a 501c3. They want to see a return in their investment. And to find brands that want to be in that space because of the consumer, because of the the ability to activate, the ability to get value out of that space is going to be relatively narrow. And then and then layer in, they have to have the marketing budget already allocated and ready to go. That narrows that pool down even more so. And so that's why agencies, that's why we exist, is to be able to help
Yeah.
that individual find brands that align, that see value, and then have budget and can come in and offer and drive value.
Yeah, and yeah, no, absolutely. And it's, I've been selling sponsorship and ad space for almost all my career, and
Yep.
if it was that easy, everybody would be doing right.
Exactly.
The number of
Exactly.
pitches you have to do, and and you've been probably in those pitches where you're like, I should have said this or should have done that, or and so you walk away feeling like you left money on the table, and yeah.
The ones that I hate are the ones where it's like, this is such a no-brainer for them. It is
Oh,
too bad.
yes.
They misunderstand. The biggest ones are
Yeah.
the ones that misunderstand youth sports.
Yeah.
And I haven't either, I haven't relayed it correctly, or they aren't willing to take a chance and come see it, or they aren't ready. That's my biggest. I think we're in a point where that's starting to really shift and change, but that's been the biggest frustration for me, is trying to get over that hump of education, and finding brands that just aren't are so old school or have made decisions in such an old school way.
Yeah.
They're not willing to try something new and take a chance.
Well, this is a good segue into this next segment. So, kind of talking about the ROI and their expectations. So, I was interviewing a brand, a very large consumer brand,
Well,
and one of the things he brought up, which is a valid point, which is for me to spend money, it's got to
yep,
move the needle.
absolutely, it
And
should.
if we're doing sampling at these events,
Yep,
it I have to see that across all my, we can go down to a zip code level and give
yep,
coupons out and see if there's a rise, but if you're only talking at a tournament, if I only did one tournament and you're telling me the numbers are this, and I'm not gonna, even if I give it, and 100% of the people took the coupon and went into the store, it's going to be minuscule as far as the movement, right?
well, it depends what their objectives are. It depends. So if you're a brand like P&G or like Unilever, and
Hmm.
you're saying, I want coupon distribution and I want to compare it to that of what I'm doing in mailers, of course it's not going
Yeah.
to be apples to apples. But what the difference of the conversation is, if I'm doing mailers, my ROI on what I'm sending out and for a targeted audience is going to be very different. So for example, using, let's take P&G and continue down that route,
Yeah.
they released a bug spray relatively recently, about a year and a half ago, called Zevo. The product was in a certain division of a new product growth line for them. So it had
Hmm.
a different budget line, different strategy, as really does every individual line
Right.
item within P&G, which is really how
Yeah.
you have to go about it in order to understand how to attack it. And so their objectives were really to get in front of mom and prove that they could get in front of mom and that mom had an opinion on it. So that's where, if you can start saying mom liked or didn't like, and I can start proving that out with the engaged consumer so that they can make educated decisions on, is it the southeast, southwest, northeast, northwest? Where
Right.
is there
Yeah.
a higher engagement, and where can you start proving that out? That's where you can start adding value as a sponsorship company like ours, because we do. And I think obviously we've talked about this, but after every major event, so like the volleyball event we have coming up, we just finished the survey for it. today. So when the event ends on Monday, every athlete and parent at the event will receive an email to their email inbox that says, please take our post-event survey. Base wrote that survey, and it
Mm,
includes both, what did you think of the umpires, refs, and courts? And it also includes which sponsors do you remember? Honey, if they answered that they remembered Honey Stinger, they will immediately get transferred to a question that says,
right.
Honey Stinger was on site. Did you sample their product? They answer yes or no. They'll get, one or two more questions that'll say, whatever, what did you think about it and which flavor, that kind of thing. And then we'll deliver those results back to Honey Stinger post event. And then what we can do is also layer in the demographics and the location and the other value propositions based on the overarching survey so that they can make educated decisions in the future about marketing, about ROI, about really, we hate the word ROI. It's not an investment return on objectives. What are their marketing
Right.
objectives
Yeah.
and what are we delivering against those? So yes, if you're asking for a apples to apples with mailers, that's not a fair comparison.
Correct.
What you
Yeah.
have to start doing is saying, within that micro brand of the macro of P&G or the micro of Unilever, what are the objectives of that brand and how are you measuring them? And then give me a chance to be able to affect those. Because I think with our market, you absolutely could across any of those brands.
I want to dive into something you said though, because I think this is important for the operators listening. So you had this large volleyball event.
Yep.
I'm a coach. I signed my team up for this volleyball event.
Yep.
You mentioned that the participants, I'm assuming the parents and the kids, or
Mhm.
parents, are getting a survey. How are you
Yep.
collecting email addresses of all the parents that are coming? Is that through the ticketing agency, ticketing company?
That's a good question. So operators, every sport, as we mentioned, sort of builds the sports differently. So
Yeah,
lacrosse, for example, when you register for a lacrosse event, typically it's done by a club coordinator or by a
that's right.
coach.
Yeah.
That's the registrant. In many
So the
recruiting
one
events,
registrant
yep,
might have 10 people behind them, but you only know the one.
correct.
Yep.
You
Okay.
only know the one, correct.
Yep.
So that's the sport of lacrosse. In most volleyball and basketball, even softball and baseball events that we work in, there has to be a level of registration by the parents for a couple of reasons. One, for high level recruiting events, there's NCAA regulations that the organization has to adhere by. And part of that means they have to collect every athlete that was on site so that they can have
Mm-mm.
that conversation with the NCAA to meet those regulations. So they collect, the organization, the operator collects all of those email addresses. So post event, the operator is sending out, and our surveys are branded as that of the event. So the individual receiving it, mom and Susie, they
Yeah.
believe it's coming from that tournament, and it is. It's coming from them, and it's branded as that tournament. Base just collects the results.
Right. When you analyze the
So
results from there, yeah, that
right,
makes sense.
exactly. So yes, and not all of them are the same. Now, we've worked with a lot of our operators to start doing a better job of collecting parent and athlete line items or
Yeah.
names and emails. The big piece where a lot of this is changing and the reason they are collecting it on their own is because of the stay to play model. So that model is if you want to play a tournament run by that operator, you have to stay at a hotel that's partnered with that operator, or you have to apply for an exemption. In which case, either direction, they're collecting your personal contact information, and then we're able to use that for
Yeah.
our
Interesting.
surveys.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for explaining that. I think that
Yep.
was an important touch point. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thinking
And that's
about
also no base doesn't own email addresses. We don't collect them. That's not
right.
our. That's owned by the operator. We never sell. Also, if any operators are listening, never sell your email database. Never sell your
Yeah,
email addresses. It's one of the most valuable elements you own. Sell the right to send an email on your behalf, and you can
that's right.
absolutely
Yeah.
integrate messaging, but never, ever, in any circumstance, sell an email address.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's, yeah, don't do that. So let's go back to this concept of, okay, so and I just want to, for all the critics out there, right? And
Yep.
address them too, right? They
Sure.
argue that youth sports, right, creates, this idea that pressure to commercialize children and their activities, right? How do you respond to that concern?
It's actually not a concern we're seeing.
Good. Yeah.
So I would say the NIL space, I'm not going to touch. That's not a space I'm an expert in. We certainly
Yeah.
see it. If a parent chooses or an athlete and their family choose to go forward with NIL opportunities, if that's a decision that's best for that family, I think that's wonderful. And I wish them the best. That's not a space that we're touching. I think there's going to be a lot of changes both in regulation and how that space is engaged with in the near future. The Wall Street Journal did a really interesting article last week on high school athletes beginning to take advantage of NIL, and one of the things I think they noted at the last line of it was like the average high school athlete that's participating in NIL is seeing like $3,000 annually. So we're not talking big dollars here.
No.
But that's not a space we're in. In regards to commercializing events and facilities, like what we do, one of the questions we ask in our survey is, facilities and events often need sponsors in order to engage. Actually, that's sort of the high level question. The question itself says, which type of sponsor are you most likely to consider? And then the options dependent on the respondent. So if an athlete receives that question, the option will read sponsors that support sports that I participate in, sponsors that support college athletes I support, sponsors that support college schools I support, pro athletes and pro sports. And overwhelmingly, over 80% of parents, when they receive it, say it says sports my child participates in, and the like. And so based on those questions, we see over 80% of parents that choose sports that my child participates in. Of athletes, interestingly, it's lower. It's about 68 to 70% in the child with sponsors that I participate in, still overwhelmingly towards the ones that I participate in versus cumulatively everybody else, college athletes, pro or college. And even with coaches, college coaches, it tends to deviate towards college and college athletes, not shockingly. But within the ecosystem, parents and athletes want to see sponsors there. It shows an investment and it's almost, I acknowledge what you're doing.
Yeah.
I acknowledge that this is important. I am showing up and I'm putting my brand where you are investing your time and your money. And parents and athletes want to see it. It's no longer that day and age of like, Little League Little League's been commercialized for,
That's true. Yeah.
the Little League World Series is one of the most over commercialized youth sports events that I would argue doesn't deliver the return that it should, but it's conceptually what exists for youth sports. But that has been over commercialized for over a decade since it's been on ESPN.
Yeah, it's true.
So I
That's a
would
good
argue that
example.
doesn't exist really anymore, and it certainly isn't reflected in the data that we're seeing.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's good. That's good to hear that. Because again, going back to our discussion on brands should be looking at youth sports and sponsoring youth sports.
Absolutely. Parents want them there. They want them to come. I mean, it's also the funniest piece of all of this is the first thing operators say to us is parents are so bored at my events because they are. There's 3 or 4 hours between their kids' games
That's
that they're
right.
doing
Yeah,
nothing.
nothing. Yeah.
They would kill for a sponsor to come on site and give them a snack or talk to them about telecom, the most boring topic in the world. Do you know our engagement rate with on-site sponsors is 80%.
I believe it.
80%
Yeah.
which is where else are you seeing an 80% engagement rate? It's yeah, I mean, I could obviously go on for a while about this, but yes, I think there's no better return because of the need parents want to see of these sponsors coming.
Yeah. Talk about a brand that saw surprising ROI from a youth sports.
What's a good brand that we've said? Yeti's an interesting one. It's not necessarily the ROI is certainly a part of it, but I think the storyline of where they are and where they're going is almost more interesting. So Yeti, we started talking to them almost a year and a half, almost 2 years ago. And same thing as the conversation we had originally of what is youth sports was where this all started. And it took almost a year, a little less than a year, to get them with follow-ups and conversations and images and videos while we're at events for them to start wrapping their heads around where youth sports really was, and where Yeti could potentially start fitting into it and what that might look like. And so after we'd had a long conversations, we started finding 1 or 2 events, and that's where they started. They said, okay, we'll dip our toe in. Let's find
Mm-hmm.
one event. And it was actually this volleyball event. Last year was the first event that they came to. They didn't, I should say, they sponsored. They did not send an activation. That was them dipping their toe in. It was an investment. They sent product for college coaches as a value in kind. They had product for sale, discounted rates at the merchandise tent, and then they had sponsored a court and did some cool activations.
Mm-hmm.
But they themselves did not come. What we saw in the data was that, well, 100% of the product that was sold on site sold out, which was awesome. It actually sold out within the first day of the 3-day event. And then what we did is we surveyed against those that of the respondents that purchased and those who didn't. About 5% of the respondents had purchased and about 95% hadn't. And the number one reason was because either I wasn't aware it was for sale or it was sold out, which probably wasn't aware it was for sale because it was sold out.
Right.
Right. So that was really good feedback for us to be able to give back to the sponsor, back to Yeti. They loved that data. It was the first reason they signed on for a second event in the same year. They signed on for a 1,200 team softball event where they leveled up what they did from an activation perspective. They put custom coolers into the dugouts. They did custom bottles for two of the top teams or the all-star teams that were playing. And then they had, there's ESPN visibility. So they had signs on all the ESPN fields and some other stuff. But they leveled up. And it was the exact same result, even though they'd increased their amount sold at merch. And so we were the first operator that they've only worked with a couple in youth sports, us and one other, to be honest. And the other wasn't a real sponsorship. It was a merchandising play. So we're the first true sponsor. We gave them more data than what they're getting from many of their college partners. And they said it was relatively in line with what they're getting at the pro level. That encouraged them to be able to give them not just, hey, you guys sold a bunch of stuff. Good job. Here's the demographic of the consumer who purchased it. Here's information about why those who didn't purchase it. So
Because that was in the follow-up survey.
Because that was in the follow-up survey as well. Yep.
Yeah.
So we had compounding data from 2 different sports that we're able to give them. And then total awareness driven. And we told them, you look at the brands who drove the highest rate of awareness of activation. It's those that came and had a booth or came and engaged consumers. Because you didn't, you missed out on being one of the top most recognized brands as a sponsor. They signed a 3-year partnership with us and this operator. They're going to expand their partnership from 2 events to 3 events. And they are bringing their custom engraver activation to 2 of those events.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That's so cool.
Which they've only brought to like Formula One and top tier events because they recognize the value driven. So all of this, the more data you have,
can I put my request
value
in to get a Yeti formal?
I'll
send it over after.
All right. Yeah. So at these events, you can get your name, you can get a basketball or a baseball, you can get your number, all this cool stuff. Yeah.
That's so cool. That's a great activation.
Yep.
Beautiful.
Yep.
So, and this is a tough question, and
cool.
I know the answer. You're going to say it depends, right? And that's fair. But
okay.
So you look at something like Yeti, and I'm not asking for exact numbers, but you're talking about a 45,000 person event.
Yep.
For a sponsor to go in there, what kind of dollars are you talking? And give me a range. Again, I'm not looking for specifics, but
5 to 6 figures typically.
Okay.
Depending on, never sub 5. It's not worth it to the operator to really engage at that level because they've built the behemoth. They deserve, they're bringing you 45,000 consumers in a captured and engaged space. So
exactly.
So it's typically 5 to 6 figures depending on the amount of activation, the needs of the assets, the customization. If they need, some of our brands were sending staff to help facilitate the activation so they can be in more places at once. So
you're sending staff? I'm sorry. Is that what you said?
Base will send staff to help facilitate activation. So all of that can balloon costs. It sort of depends on what they're doing.
Okay. Thank you for helping. Wrap our minds around that. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So, I'm going to Well, I mean, I won't assume. Okay. Look, thinking about the long-term impact of youth sports sponsorship, we talked about the new generations coming up, right? Do you have any information yet on how long-term that might affect that young person into adulthood as they move on? I mean, well, base has been around for a few years. It's not like you started
It's our
yesterday.
third
So,
year. Yep.
third year. So, is there
Mhm.
any indication yet, probably too early?
Any indication yet towards what? I apologize. I
I'm
misunderstood.
sorry, I didn't.
Yep.
I'm thinking more about, okay, so I'm a young person attending an event. I see Yeti, right? And now I'm
Long-term
on Yeti,
adoption of the brand and
adoption of the
loyalty.
brand and loyalty. Thank you. Yes, that's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to get at.
No, I think that's fair. I would say you're right. We probably don't. We've only been surveying for the last 2 years. I don't think we have enough data by and large to be able to show that. As I mentioned, a lot of brands also are still dipping their toe in the water
Yeah, yeah,
at the rate to drive that long-term value for us that's measurable. I think Yeti will be a good one because they've made a long-term commitment. We'll be able to measure across multi-year for them. They were there last year. We'll start seeing year-over-year data this year. So I do think we're going to start seeing more and more of that. But I don't think I've got a strong sense of it. The other element of that is depending on what the brand objectives are. I mean, as you know, brands just like any other company looks at investments on a purchase funnel metric. So
right.
awareness, consideration, precision, and loyalty. So if their objectives are awareness and their objectives aren't like loyalty, it's going to take years to build down if they're working against an awareness play versus working against like a because the assets and the structure and the value to engage the consumer are all very different depending on what the brand objectives are.
Yeah,
So it's all very
that makes
it's
sense.
not what it's not going to work for one brand. What's going to work for another for that long term measurable value.
And drilling into, well, looking at a campaign, again, we'll use Yeti or just pick your brands. Are
Yeah.
most of them, and is your pitch to them activation at the event, or are they also looking at social media, maybe the newsletter, maybe the email for that operator?
A
What's
great question, and we are very stringent on this. We require every sponsor that comes in to be a sponsor across three main core assets, and
okay?
that's they get some level of digital, depending on investment and assets available by operator, but they get some level of digital, social, website integration,
Mhm.
email, blog posts. So many of our operators now have apps, so apps and push notifications. So that's one option. The other, I'm just going to slip this in for any operators listening. The more you can get onto your own dedicated platforms, the more value you can drive for sponsors. If you're using a third party app or a third party website or third party, other digital platform that is selling ads, that's revenue you're creating for them and you're not taking for yourself.
Yeah.
So just worth noting and something I'm really proud of most of our operators. They've moved off of all of those third parties and are building them themselves. So yeah, apps are a big one. So anyway, digital the ability to activate on site doesn't mean they all take advantage of it. Like I mentioned, Yeti didn't come and bring a 10
Oh,
by
that's
10
right.
or bring by
Right.
an
Yeah.
activation, but you have
Hmm.
the ability to come and engage consumers. We think this captured audience over a sustained period of time is the most valuable asset we have. We want to make sure brands understand that and have the right to take advantage of it. So that's on-site engagement and then some level of signage or brand visibility through passive brand visibility during the event. The amount of awareness driven from that passive engagement is significant. If you don't have signage and you don't have visibility, we are not going to be able to get a measured result against the value of
Mm.
your investment. And we want to make sure we've got that. So we have, and again, investment size and strategy dependent will depend on what those assets look like, the quantity and the investment value. But
Yeah.
there's some level of passive brand visibility throughout the event.
And are you selling more of a, here's your rate card, here's your package A, B, or C, with some customization, or is it here's what we can offer and brands, what's your objective, right?
Very rarely do we have like a standard rate card. There's
Yeah.
a little bit of like, if they come in at the lowest price point, there's only so much we can
Right.
do.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And so if we know where their budgets are and it's really low, you know, it's pretty easy to move forward. But if they've got some room to play and they want to do something interesting and unique, there's a lot of cool things that we can do for a brand. We've got an incredible sweepstakes partner. Like I mentioned, digital is important to us.
Mm-hmm.
We work with a company called Squad, SQWAD. They are the best because they've done every piece of homework to work with every lawyer in every state to make sure that data collection at every level is allowed and copacetic, and they work with all the pro sports. They're the
Yeah.
best. But that's a really valuable asset to have really quality sweepstakes for certain operators and to be able to activate against it. But yeah, it all depends.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's uh, how. Let's dive into that a little bit too. What is a sweepstakes at an event look like? Mean?
Yes, we don't typically do sweepstakes
Oh,
at the events.
there you go.
What we'll do is we'll say, like car companies, to be
Hmm.
able to capture email addresses, target and retarget, and knowing zip codes and the like gives them the ability to distribute that among dealers, and it drives a lot of value. So what we can do is, as we mentioned, we have every mom's email address or one email address per athlete. That is it has to be a working email address for a lot of different reasons: communication by event, weather updates and the like, communication by NCAA. So we have legitimate email addresses. So the
Yeah,
operator
yeah.
sends these branded sweepstakes out through email, through push notifications, and through other assets that we have. So it's typically, depending on, again, the investment, the amount of assets they have from a digital perspective, they'll get it at least once over email, at least once over app, if assuming there's an app, and at least once, typically twice over social, to be able to sign up for whatever the
There's sign
sweepstakes
up. Yeah.
is.
Okay, I got it. Okay,
Yep.
that makes sense. We talked about in our when we first were talking about youth sports sponsorship off air. We talked about the CSR cause marketing, right?
Yep.
In our conversation prior, we were talking about hard metrics. I spend X, I get Y in return, right?
Yep.
Now, if moving on to this cause marketing idea where their softer metrics are really it's just I want to be present, right? I know you're dabbling into that, so
Mhm.
shed some light on what does that mean for an operator? What does that mean for a sponsor? What are they looking for?
Yeah, I think we talked about this because, without naming names, there's one brand that went into the Super Bowl and invested the 7.3 million dollars or whatever it cost for the 30-second Super Bowl ad,
Yeah,
and raised awareness, rightfully so, of the number of girls dropping out, as we sort of alluded to at the beginning of this, of girls dropping out of youth sports.
yeah,
Now, imagine if they had repositioned that $7 million and invested it directly with female youth athletes and captured that content and reposted that organically without a paid element across their social channels or across the internet, and what that could have hypothetically done on a compounding basis across everyone. And that's the sad part that Mark and I look at, my co-founder and I look at frequently in this space is, the amount of money wasted on mass market appeal versus direct consumer engagement. And again, we talked about this too previously, but getting
yeah,
lost in the scroll or getting lost in the mass media conversation. Why not invest in these young athletes and these kids? And yes, CSR is certainly a potential piece of that. And it doesn't have to be. A lot of companies look at CSR as their 501(c)(3) and their nonprofit giving.
yeah,
But our argument is that, there's a way to have corporate social responsibility, to engage consumers and families authentically and valuably, that can do well by doing good. And you can do well as a company if you invest authentically and valuably, and you engage authentically and valuably with the consumers that matter most to you. And I just believe, that company cares deeply about, young female athletes and the moms that are purchasing the products for those young female athletes or for themselves. And I believe if they engaged them valuably and showed up where they want them to, where these moms want them to show up,
yeah.
the impact that it will create for that brand. And they can do great things on site. They can promote other nonprofits. They can bring, really empowered pro athletes and create engagement experiences. We have, this volleyball event I mentioned, it's a convention center. There are rooms that we can dedicate and have speaker halls. We've done that at one of our basketball events. The
Hmm.
ESPN sent several female commentators to come and talk about leadership to these young female basketball players. There's a way that you can really authentically and valuably engage in a socially responsible way that drives value for brands. And we're out there beating that drum. We're seeing some really cool brands like Yeti
Yeah.
moving and seeing needles and starting to drive value. It's just, moving a
Yeah.
big ship takes some time.
So do you think if where do you think we are if the very beginning or the youth sports sponsorship is a line item in every Fortune 500 brand that makes sense? Where are we from zero to that in your mind?
We're at one.
Yeah. Okay. That was my
um,
thinking too. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, we're the issue that we all have to remember though is we are competing against social media, we're competing against Google Ads, we're competing against sponsorship at college, we're competing against sponsorship at pro and minor league, that we're competing against international. It's no longer at those level of
That's
companies.
right.
We're
Yeah.
competing on the international stage in marketing. So, if you're talking about a corner deli shop supporting a corner facility, sure, there's value there. But if you're talking about a mega company coming here, it's going to be a numbers game. You've got to be able to prove a return at scale, and you've got to be able to prove a return of value for these brands to continue to be a part of it. And part of that might be, hey, you can come capture content, authentic and valuable content with families using your product, engaged in the conversation you want them to, and use that for your larger marketing ecosystem.
Yeah.
And there's value to be had in that. Is, hey, come and grab your content with us. The one thing I'll say though is there are a couple of brands out there that don't pay for that. They say, hey, you get to be associated with me if I can come bring some product and
Mm,
capture everything at your
right.
event.
Yeah.
Youth operators know that they've created value and they have to remember that. Never let a brand on for free. The minute you do that, you've wiped away the value of your operator. And
Yeah.
brand marketers talk. It makes it very difficult to get them back in at a paid dollar figure.
Yeah, so in-kind donations of product. We'll give
Right.
you this for free, right? And then I
And
mean it
then we want,
sounds
right.
nice, right?
Right. Right.
Right? It sounds good, right? Um,
Yep.
so looking at and I swear this will be our last question, maybe.
Okay.
So the looking at let me ask it this way. If you had a magic wand, okay?
Yeah.
And how would you reshape, and you are, but we're early, we're at that one point, right? So
Yeah.
how maybe just look out 5 years from now on how we measure ROI at youth sports, and because you're pontificating, you're not wrong. So
Yeah. I
right?
think that's fair. I really like the way we're doing it. I mean, we use
Hmm.
a relatively similar method at Nielsen. So I think, there's certain things that Base is working on sort of stealth, that we're excited to be adding into our portfolio that are going to add measurement techniques, sort of passive consumer measurement at facilities. So it doesn't have facilities are tougher to measure consumers at events. You've got a list, you can send it out, you can get consumer feedback.
Yeah.
Facilities, they don't, most youth sports facilities don't run their own events. Someone else comes in, rents
Right.
it,
Right.
and runs an event. So
Yeah.
we're working on methods that we'll start integrating here in 25, that are going to start going live soon, that we'll be measuring foot traffic in certain areas of facilities. We've got ways to measure the gate swings or door swings, and we've got other things that we're going to be measuring to be able to start trying to understand how to add more specific consumer value throughout facilities. There's also a number of third parties outside of us that measure
Yeah.
cell phone data and consumer movement around communities, and that
Right.
helps understand the consumer movement to and from facilities. We certainly look at that, and I know a number of tourism bureaus that run facilities, they're looking at that data also. And that's certainly helpful.
Like
But yeah, I think
geofencing, are you kind of alluding to that type of concept?
it is kind of geofencing. It's not really anymore. I mean, geofencing would be to draw a circle around whose that is and then measure just who's in that circle. These companies can track cell phone data. So they know exactly
Oh,
who,
right.
they don't know
Yeah.
your name, but they know everything about you based on the
Mhm.
apps that you've downloaded and then the data they are able to collect by buying it from Apple or all of these other companies, or the
Mhm.
apps that you've downloaded that are in the Apple store. So they're not buying it from Apple, they're buying it from the apps that you've given
Apps, yeah.
permission to share data.
Yeah,
So they
don't get us
have
in
all,
trouble.
yeah. So they have all your data. They know everybody know everybody, and they essentially track like if you went from a facility to Chipotle or from a facility to McDonald's. Those are two very different types of consumers, but they can track who that is and be able to give us that data so that we know if more consumers are going to Chipotle, what that profile might look like versus McDonald's. And then if it's McDonald's, hey, Burger King, if you want to capture half of this audience, you should be a sponsor so that you can engage them. So that type of data is all stuff that we work off of as
Yeah,
well.
yeah. But that has to be a well-trafficked facility for it to make sense,
Totally.
right?
Yeah. Most
Yeah.
of the
Or an
facilities, I think that's
event
worth
too.
noting.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Most of the facilities and events that we work with are like the smaller size of facilities we work with are foot traffic 250,000 people. We have facilities that traffic over 2 million.
Wow. Yeah.
That's
So,
like our sweet spot. And then
hmm.
from an event perspective, we look the smallest event on an individual basis we would typically take would have like 100 plus teams. That would be small if it was a one-off, but that could happen. Typically it's an operator who runs several hundred plus team events. Those are typically the ones that we're
Okay.
engaged
Yeah,
with.
that
Yeah,
makes a lot of sense, especially if that you got to have enough data for it to
exactly.
make sense too. Yeah, so yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Is there any question I didn't ask you that I should ask you? Do we leave anything off? We've been talking
Um,
for a bit about this. Is there something you want to talk about in particular?
we talked about a lot of my passion points: girls sports,
Yeah.
measurement, brands really starting to care about and invest and educate themselves on the youth sports and youth sports ecosystem. I think the last piece of this that I didn't get to say enough about is,
Yeah.
base was co-founded. I didn't by no means even close to built this on my own. My business partner Mark DeBorsnak, he is a significant portion behind one of the reasons we've been able to grow at the rate and become as successful as we have. He has more than 10 years of experience in the youth sports ecosystem. He's built baseball stadiums all across the country. He knows tourism bureaus in all 50 states. And he's been an incredible business partner to work with. And I think, one of the reasons we are so passionate about what we do is we both have daughters, we both have kids. We both played sports at a competitive level. He played baseball at West Virginia University. So we both understand the commitment and value, but we also truly internalize the value that youth sports offer. So while we understand that this is a lot of for-profit businesses all working together, we all need to be working together to do good and to give back and to be as much a part of these young kids and these young parents' lives in a positive way. And I think we both take that role and responsibility in this ecosystem incredibly seriously, and are working really hard to do that, to build an incredible business and build a really strong business, but certainly build it the right way, and certainly continue to be an authentic and valuable partner to all stakeholders, whether it be the athlete, the parent, the brand, the operator, and certainly anyone within our company. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, very last question, which
yeah,
is, so you don't know the next speaker that's coming on, but I want you
okay.
to ask the next speaker a question
Oh,
about so the business of youth sports. What are you curious about? And I'll
what am
ask it on
I
the
curious
next. Yeah.
about the business of youth sports? I'm curious to understand what most other people think is the most investable part of youth sports. That
That's a
could,
great
that could
question.
go in a lot
Yeah.
of different directions,
Yeah.
but I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
curious where they see the most investable element of youth sports.
Great question. All right, we'll bring that up on the next one.
All right.
Carrie, it's been
Well,
a pleasure. I hope we can have you back on the show. This was just my head was spinning and I could have gone in a lot more directions and I had to contain myself from diving deeper and tangents. And I mean, the topic of youth sports, like you said, I like that. We're at a one, right, in the
right.
beginning of it. And it's just like back in my tech days when we would start technology when an industry that didn't exist or a brand new product, and you were just slugging it out, trying to create adoption. And right? And hoping that, it was going to take off. And I think that's where we're at with youth sports.
Yeah.
And I think it's just getting the recognition. And I think there's smart people like you out there that are saying, okay, let's just do this right. Because you could definitely do it wrong, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
let's make sure that we're doing it right. So we appreciate your expertise.
I appreciate that. And just like you said, the early adopters in tech, they won. I mean, they won and they won big. And the
Right.
same thing's going to happen in this space is the early adopters on the brand side that come in and do it right and really authentically and valuably engage, they're going to win.
They're
And
going to
we're
win.
excited to be
Yeah.
a part of that.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Carrie, and good luck to you and Base, and keep on doing what you're doing for all the youth players. Appreciate
Thanks,
you.
Bill. Appreciate it.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.